Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, now that Logan has got Python installed on the system, in this video what he's going to do is demonstrate the interpreter in action. Let's make sure that everything got installed all right and that we can actually go about executing some Python. So Logan?
Alright, to do this we're going to use the interactive interpreter. What that means is we'll be able to type out Python statements one by one and then execute them and immediately see the result without having to create a file first.
Okay.
Now to do this we need to first bring up a Python prompt, and there's two ways we can quickly do this. The first way is to go to the Start menu and look under the program group created for Python 2.5. Under here one of the options available is to run Python at the command line. If we do that, we'll load up this Python command line, which gives the Python version and a few basic commands that can be run. It gives us 3 greater than signs as a flashing prompt, indicating that we are now free to type whatever statements we would wish. Now I want to show one other way that we can load this up, in my opinion more quickly, and that is simply we can go to Start Run and type in Python. And if everything is linked up correctly by the installer, then we'll get the Python command line running from this way.
Okay.
Just a bit faster.
Okay, so what can we do?
Well, the first thing I want to do is, having this open is of course now proving the fact that our Python installation is indeed working, because obviously a system that does not have Python isn't going to load to a Python 2.5.2 version confirmation.
This is true.
So what we want to do here is just run a few very simple Python statements just to show some example lines. The first thing I want to do is just show the text hello world, and we can do this by using the print statement. So if we print opening double quote hello world,
Now you got a W in there, hello,
and end off with a closing double quote and simply hit enter, that gets executed as a statement and we see the hello world text appear on the screen.
Okay.
Now just to play around with things for a minute, we could of course show a basic use of a variable. If we drop in a variable named text and set that equal to the text hello world, we hit enter, that statement evaluates, but we see no output.
Now, as someone who's coming with a very basic programming background and an understanding of other languages, you just said text equal. Now, there are languages out there that I use that you have to, when declaring a variable, specify exactly what kind of data you're about to put in this variable.
Yes, and we can get more in depth into this when we get into the data types lesson. But I can very quickly point out here that Python is a dynamically typed language.
What do you mean by that?
And that means the type of a variable is not determined, or rather the type of variable is determined by the data stored in it. That means we don't say that text is a string here. What we did is simply put a string into text, and then by nature of that assignment, text is now a string.
Okay, so then if I was to turn around and put 5 into text, would text still be a string?
No, it would be changed, and thus we get dynamic typing. We would change types over to an integer because that's the kind of data we need to store.
Wow, sounds kind of crazy.
So we can delve into this in quite a bit more depth when we get into the data types lesson. But again, good to point that out, that of course I haven't set a type here. I've simply made up a variable named text and assigned a string into it.
So now it's a string.
And it is indeed. As a matter of fact, we can print out text and we get the hello world output. As a matter of fact, we can just type in the variable text by itself because we're at the command line interpreter, and we get that evaluated. But notice how it evaluated. We actually get little single quotes on the side of it. So when you're at the command line interpreter, the interactive interpreter, you can drop expressions in place directly. If you had done this in an actual code file, you would generally get no output unless there was some explicit output given.
Okay.
But that is one small difference in the interactive interpreter versus the interpreter used when reading a file, and that is expressions, or the result of an expression, the data given, is just directly shown if you're at the interactive interpreter.
I gotcha. Okay.
Now what's cool about that is we can leverage that fact to turn the interactive interpreter into a calculator. Because it's going to simply show us whatever value an expression returned, we could type out mathematical expressions and use Python as a calculator. To give an example of that, we could use something like 2 times 4 plus 2. And simply typing this expression out and hitting enter will yield the value 10.
Okay.
Or we could play with this a little bit and say 2 times open parenthesis 4 plus 2, changes the operator precedence, and now we get a value of 12.
Very nice.
So, and since Python is so easily accessible, we were able to just grab it from the start menu or even run it from just the command line prompt. We can very quickly invoke the interactive interpreter, and it makes a very handy calculator for us. It's actually useful to use even if you're writing a full Python application, and that if you're trying to solve some mathematical expression, you can drop into the interactive interpreter for a moment just to figure it out, make sure you're getting expected results for your expression. And then once you've learned what you need to learn from this, from rapid testing, go back into your full application.
So does that mean we can do more complex stuff in here, like loops and things like that?
It does indeed. As a matter of fact, there is a functionality given to allow you to type multiple line statements. Basically, when a statement requires a group of other statements, such as an if statement or a for statement, you are given the facility to type in multiple lines.
Can you give me an example?
Well, for an example of that, let's consider the text variable. We still have that in existence. If I type out text, we still get the string hello world, but we could make a very quick loop that iterates character by character through this string. We could do that by using for. We'll store the individual characters in a variable called char. So for char in text, and then we'll give a colon to indicate that we have a group of statements that go with this for
So
statement.
anytime you have a group of statements, you got to have a colon like that?
Exactly. A colon will always precede things that require multiple lines afterwards. So
Okay.
once we drop into the colon, we'll actually drop in an indentation, and then we're allowed to type as many statements as we wish.
I see.
So for char in text, you'll notice that our prompt has changed to 3 dots, indicating that we're now expecting a block being a number of statements indicated by an indentation. Because, of course, blocks in Python are specified by indentation rather than by containing characters. This differs from other languages like C, where you have curly braces to indicate blocks. And we'll get more in depth into this when we get into the syntax section.
Now, did you just hit tab?
I did.
Okay.
And really I'm using tab just because I usually use that in whatever text editor. I'll usually allow the text editor to change tab into whatever it wants to, a number of spaces or whatever.
Sure.
I've used tab just because of an easy convention to remember. It's generally what I use in IDE, so it's just the first thing that comes to mind when I'm
cool.
indenting.
Okay.
So we'll do for char in text. We're expecting a block indicated by the 3 dots. I have tabbed over once to satisfy the requirements of that block, and now we can drop in a statement. That statement will be print char. So we simply print the individual character. I'll hit enter one more time, and you'll notice that it's given us the ability to type multiple statements if we wish. We see that we still have 3 dots. I'm going to end this off by hitting enter one more time, so we're essentially giving an empty, unindented line. So if we hit enter, it now sees that as the end of the overall statement for the for loop and executes it. And in executing it, we see we get character by character, each on its own line, the characters held in our hello world text string.
Okay. Very, very interesting.
So really with that, that's all I wanted to cover in this lesson. Again, just showing that our Python installation does indeed work, and giving a quick crash course to the interactive interpreter.
Awesome. All right, with that, that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.